Um, Hello, everyone. Can't see your faces anymore, but this is exciting. We have about, I guess we're getting up to maybe 40 people now in this Zoom room. I'm Rochelle Wheeler, Senior Transportation Coordinator with the City of Alameda. And I'm the city's project manager for the Alameda Active Transportation Plan. And welcome to our second open house. And this one is focusing on our draft recommendations for improving walking and biking safety and access. We are now almost halfway through a little over 4-week public comment period on these draft recommendations. And today's open house, we're going to give you an overview of our many draft recommendations, just give you kind of like a quick tour through them. It's a lot, and we know that, and we're not going to dive too deep into the details of each of the recommendations. We want to just kind of give you a broad overview, and we'll have some time tonight to take your input and your questions and provide some responses. But I'll say up front, this is certainly not the only time to give input. This is not the only forum. We've got 5 or 6, I think, more listening sessions, and we'll talk about those later. We've got lots of ways for you to give input. So don't feel like if your question is not answered tonight, like we haven't heard you or you don't have an opportunity to give input. So please visit our webpage, which we'll have up on the screen, for much more information on how to comment. So I first just want to acknowledge some of the obvious things, that so much has happened since we launched this project almost a year ago. And some of you might have been at that open house that Megan mentioned last November. But we started this project last August. And then in November, we had that open house where we filled the community room at the library with over 150 people, including lots of kids running around and drawing and making pictures. But today we have to meet virtually during this worldwide pandemic. And I do want to say, I hope that everyone is safe and well and doing what's needed to care for your mental and physical well-being. And thank you for joining us and taking time out of your really busy schedules tonight. I really wish we could meet in person and have maps and boards that we could spread all over the room and all be moving around looking at those and eating some carrots and hummus. But tonight, this is our option. And it is good to be with you. And one of the things we're seeing during this pandemic is the importance of and the flourishing of walking and biking. And I'm sure you guys have seen that. I've seen that around Alameda. I'm sure you've seen it. You're participating in it. And we know also that walking and biking are really critical too right now for our physical and our mental health, and to allow us to have some physical distance, to enjoy being together, when we're outside, because that's safer generally now than being inside. And you can see, and I'm sure you've seen around Alameda, some of the ways the city is already supporting this increased demand. And that's with slow streets, and now the recent restriping of some blocks of Park Street, with Webster Street coming soon, where we're with all of these, making more space for people to walk and bike safely, and also for our businesses to flourish. So for these projects, it's been really useful that we're already in the middle of this active transportation plan process, that's underway, and that's helped us to guide some of those COVID-19 response programs, and also to start thinking about how we might transition those programs into something longer term, and if they're supported by the community through this process. So those are thoughts that are in our head that we're definitely incorporating. And I also want to acknowledge the spotlight now, the very needed spotlight on systemic racism and also on police reform. We know, working on this project, that we need a transportation system that serves our entire community and is safe in all ways for everyone. And we've been planning that from the start. We have an equity framework, and we've been focusing on drawing in all voices of our community. But we know there's more to do here, and there is more focus than ever on this. So we know these are really different times from last November, and we feel like we have incorporated that into our recommendations as it seemed necessary. But of course, we're open to any thoughts as you provide input on these recommendations to us on whether or not we're achieving that or not. And finally, unfortunately, some areas do remain the same. We still know we're in a climate emergency, and we need big changes to slow the pace of climate change and adapt our city. Next slide, please. So we have a really full agenda tonight, and with time for input, which I'm looking forward to hearing. We've done a lot of work these past 5 months since we wrapped up our first public engagement phase. And so there's a lot we're asking for comments on. We're going to start with introductions of our team and then talk to you about the plan overview very briefly, what we heard and what we've learned. And then items 4, 5, and 6 are where our draft recommendations are and what we're asking for input on and soliciting your input on. So we're going to tour you through that and then take questions and input. And throughout the meeting, we'll also be collecting some input from you all from via an online survey, which should be fun. So essentially at this point, what we've realized is since we've done so much work, you're really seeing the main bones of our active transportation plan. These are our full recommendations on the topics. And so once we collect input on this, what we'll be doing then is prioritizing recommendations and projects and programs, and then developing an implementation plan for all of that. And then we'll release a draft plan. Again, that'll be the next phase for public comment, and we'll do that early next year. So just some logistics. At any point into the chat, you'll be able to put questions and that you have and general input, and all of us hosts will see that. And we'll take time at the as you can see at the end for those, and we'll answer as many questions as we can. We're also on Facebook Live, so we'll be grabbing questions from there as well. So this meeting is being recorded. You can probably see the little red button or red icon up at the top. We're doing that to post it on the city's YouTube page. And also we're going to be showing this video at some of the listening sessions that we're having. So we'll be showing the video of this overall presentation there. So that's what we're using that for. If you're not comfortable with that, I hope you can stay with us, but just you can just turn off your camera. So next slide, please. So this is a huge team effort, and so I wanted to introduce you to, I've introduced myself, and also another extremely important member of this team is Lisa Foster, and she's supporting the development of the plan. And also on the call tonight, we have the other 2 members of our transportation planning team, which have been giving great input to on this process, and that's Gail Payne and Brian Foster. I would also like to acknowledge a few people who are here with us tonight, and some of our council and our mayor. And I just have to, sorry about this, just be able to bring my, where do I see my, okay, I'm sorry, I'm not able to see all of the chat right now. This is our first time doing all of this. Let me just look here. Okay, just gonna look in the chat here. Oh dear. Well, I know that we have Council Member Odie with us. I think that might be so far the only council member we have. If we have others come in, I will acknowledge them. I apologize if I'm missing anyone. And we also have our assistant city manager, Jerry Bowden. And so welcome to both of you guys. We also have some other city staff here I'll just acknowledge, which is from our Public Works Department. We have our city engineer, Scott Wickstrom, and we also have Robert Vance, who is an engineer project manager in our Public Works Department. So think that's it. Yeah, with that, I'm going to pass it to our consultant team, Toole Design, who are national experts in pedestrian and bicycle planning and design, some of whom you met last fall when we kicked off the project. So take it away, Megan.
Great. Well, good evening, everyone. It's so great to see all of your names and some of your faces on the call tonight. We are very excited to share with you the draft recommendations that we've been working on for about 6 months now. And to hear what you think. So my name is Megan Woolley Osdahl. I'm a senior planner in our Toole Design Oakland office. And tonight I am joined by my colleagues, Jess Deb, who is our Portland office director. Jess is one of my mentors, fantastic, and she is also leading the Vision Zero Action Plan project and process. So as y'all were signing on, I saw a couple of our task force members joining us tonight. So thank you for being here, who are working on that process. I'm also joined by Belinda Judelman, who is a planner in our Portland office. And I think she has had a hand in developing almost all of the recommendations that you're going to see tonight. So I'm very excited to have our team here tonight to be presenting to you. Next slide. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview. Next slide, please. I think hopefully a lot of you have been following our process, that y'all attended the November workshop or that you've taken a look at the website. But just in case you haven't, just want to give you a brief background of this plan. So the purpose of this plan is really to create a roadmap for the city of projects and programs and policies that facilitate getting people to where they want to go safely and comfortably and enjoyably using active transportation. So that's walking, biking, using a wheelchair, scooter, sort of everything under the active transportation umbrella. Next slide. So our work, we are not starting from scratch. Our work on this plan is building upon the great efforts of the past. So that includes the 2010 Bicycle Master Plan, as well as the 2009 Pedestrian Master Plan. So our work on this active transportation plan is really marrying the two, marrying the bicycle and pedestrian plan, and the recognition that improvements for bicyclists improve the pedestrian realm and vice versa, of course. Next slide. So we're also building on work that has been done here recently. So currently the city is updating their general plan, and the transportation element is being updated starting this fall with the opportunity for public input. The city has also recently developed the Transportation Choices Plan and the Climate and Action Resiliency Plan. And last fall, the City Council passed a Vision Zero policy. And so this work is also quite integral to our work on the active transportation plan. Next slide, please. So here's a picture of where we are and where we're headed. So as Rochelle mentioned, we kicked off the project in in August of 2020. So about a year ago. It's kind of incredible. We're almost at the year mark. We completed our initial engagement back in November, and since then we've developed the existing conditions report. We've conducted our technical analysis and developed these draft recommendations. And then looking ahead, after we receive your feedback through the workshop tonight, as well as the listening sessions and the online portal, we'll be revising the recommendations, and then beginning to develop a toolkit and implementation strategies. So once the plan's adopted, the city can really hit the ground running in implementing the recommendations in the plan. Okay, next slide, please. So what have we heard and learned so far? Next slide. So we've already talked glowingly about our first workshop last November, and we were very pleased to have over 150 people attend. During this meeting, we got input on what it's like to walk and bike in Oakland today, and how we can create recommendations that improve this for the future. We also convened a community advisory group to give input throughout the process. And we developed an online interactive map and invited you and your neighbors to give comments and ideas. And we received over 2,000 comments on the map, which was just blew us away. It was fantastic to get so much participation. Next slide. So the city also held multiple pop-up events and focus group meetings to solicit more input, and also recognizing the importance of really meeting people where they are. So they went to the senior center and lots of different locations in the city. We also conducted a statistically significant survey. So Belinda, if you could go to the next slide. So we wanted to give you a sense, key takeaways from the survey. So if we were in person, I would say well, I guess I'm not supposed to ask if you got the survey. Anyway, I'm wondering if probably a handful of folks here got the survey. Our own Lisa Foster got it. So these takeaways here are based on the 2019 random representative sample survey of city residents. You needed to be 16 years or older to participate, and the survey was conducted by phone, online, and mail. And so what we found through the survey is that 56% of residents regularly bike or regularly take trips by bike, and 92% regularly take trips by walking, which is incredible. Over half of residents agree that they would drive less if biking and walking were safer. Over 80% of residents think the city should do more to make it safer to cross busy streets. And over 70% think the city should do more to create safer ways for people to bike throughout the community. 62% said that they would bike more if there were safer and connected bike lanes, routes, and paths. And then also we heard a preference for better bike and ped crossings over the estuary, especially in the West End. Okay, next slide. So we also conducted an analysis of existing conditions. This included a collision analysis led by Jess, a level of traffic stress, which identifies where it is and where it is not comfortable to walk and bike in Alameda today, and a trip potential analysis, which identified where it's likely that people will want to walk and bike. And these analyses really help tailor our recommendations and are able to allow us to provide really place-based, local context-specific recommendations. Okay, next slide. So from our fall engagement and analysis, our key takeaways are that y'all are really raring to go, want to walk and bike more. Parents want their children to be able to walk and bike to school, and that safety is a key priority. People also shared that large streets need improvements and that many people are concerned about speeding. There's also the recognition that bike routes do not feel comfortable for most bicyclists, and that people would like to see both a combination of on-the-ground infrastructure improvements and programs to safely encourage more people to walk and bike. Next slide. Before we dive into the Mentimeter, I just want to say that I saw a chat come through, and please do ask questions or comments to us through the chats. We're going to walk through the presentation, and then we'll save time at the end to answer these questions. I'm seeing a great question that I actually might hand to Jess, if you could answer while we get while folks get the Mentimeter ready. So I'm going to tell you what to do with Mentimeter while Jess answers this question. So Jess, you can start preparing your answer for what is Vision Zero, which is a great question. And folks, if y'all could start getting out your cell phones, something you've never heard anybody say during a presentation, and log on to menti.com. We've got a couple of interactive polling questions we'd like to ask you. So go to menti.com, and then you can input this code. And so the code is 55297. So Jess, can you tell us a little bit more about what Vision Zero is?
Sure. So the city of Alameda adopted this policy, as Megan noted, in late 2019. And Vision Zero is the statement and setting of a goal that the city would like to see zero deaths or serious injuries on the transportation system. And so it really involves changing the way that the city thinks in terms of how it plans and designs the transportation system and placing safety of all users at the center. And it's an initiative that doesn't have to just do with people walking and biking. It also takes a look at the safety of roadways for people driving, riding motorcycles also. And the great thing is that often when we improve streets for people walking and biking in terms of safety, those same safety benefits are extended to other road users. So there's a separate effort going on right now where we are walking through that Vision Zero action plan development process. And Megan will talk a little bit later about how the safety recommendations in our programs and policies from the Active Transportation Plan will interface with Vision Zero.
Great, thank you, Jess. Okay, Belinda, next slide. There we go. So we're gonna ask y'all a couple of questions throughout the presentation, but we wanted to start off with something just to get your brain juices flowing. So we'd like to hear from you. What is your favorite place to walk to in Alameda? So again, go to minty.com and use the code 55297. And then Belinda, if you could you pull up, look at this, great. Okay, so lots of folks enjoy walking and biking. So I see the beach, downtown, Park Street, the East End, anywhere along the water, Shoreline Drive, great. So I think this really goes to show the importance of pedestrian improvements and being really thoughtful about how the city spends its funding and encouraging wise investment so that folks can get to these places they like to go to. Okay, so Belinda, if you want to go to our next question. We are interested in hearing from you about what is the top issue that you would like this plan to address. And this will help, we're about to introduce to you the vision and goals, but this will also help us get a sense of what does the community really prioritize, and as we move into our next phase of developing the implementation plan, which areas should we really be focusing on? So safer school zones, adding more slow streets, safety, yeah, traffic calming, cross estuary bridge, right? Getting more people out of their cars, so encouragement and mode shift. Safer bike routes separated from, I think that's supposed to be cars, although separated from cats is probably good too. As a cat owner myself, sometimes I need some separation. North-south bike lanes, this is great, thank you, yes. This is exactly what is helpful for us to know about as we do our work, and like I said, as we develop the implementation plan. Great. Okay, well, y'all feel free to keep giving us your responses. We're going to go back to the presentation, but don't put your cell phones too far away because we do have some more questions for you as we get further along. Great. So we wanted to give you a sense of what all have we prepared and what all are we asking you to give feedback on. So during these next couple of minutes, Jess and I and Rochelle are going to walk you through the draft recommendations. So all of this information we're presenting tonight is available on the project website, which is activealameda.org/recommendations. And so the way the website's set up is that you can log on and give us your feedback on all of these items, on a handful of these items, or do some now and do some later. So we are seeking public input, and it will be open until August 16th. So you have until the 16th, so mark your calendar to give us input on this. So we're gonna walk through these now. So next slide, please. So first, the draft vision and goals. So we developed this vision based on the input that you shared during the November engagement and through a review of the goals and visions and kind of most important pieces of previously adopted plans. So the draft vision for Alameda is that Alameda is a city where people of all ages, abilities, and income levels and backgrounds can safely, conveniently, and comfortably walk, bike, and roll to their destination, including transit. By prioritizing active transportation, the community is improving public health and safety, mitigating climate change, and enhancing quality of life. So we are interested in what you think about this and encourage you to give your feedback on the website or chat us. So Belinda, if you'll go to the next slide, please. So building upon this vision, we wanted to develop a concrete set of goals that we could base our recommendations off of, and that the city could also use to track progress over time. And so the goals that really rose to the top from what we heard from y'all in November, and also from a review of adopted plans, are safety, mode shift, connectivity and comfort, equity, and community. And I'll say it was great to see your comments earlier in Mentimeter, because I think what you shared then really lines up quite nicely with this set of goals. And like I said, the recommendations that we're presenting really flow from these, as do the programs and policies that are a part of this plan are structured around these goals. So I think next slide, please. So here's your next opportunity to hop on Mentimeter. And our question for you is, did we miss anything? So keeping in mind that I realized it would have been helpful if I had listed the goals here. So I'll just repeat them again. It's, gosh, this will be a good test of my memory. Safety, mode shift, comfort and connectivity, equity, and community. So is there anything that we should also be including? Great. Thank you. We did not see that answer, in case you're wondering. But this is just great. Great. So covered bike parking, okay. Non-car connections to other cities, that's great. So that mirrors the estuary interest, but also bridges too. Better bike parking, look, there's 2 of those. So that's important for us to include. In schools, increasing safety and access to schools. Great. Anybody else? Any other bridges? Great. The goals should have metrics. That's an excellent point. Thank you for sharing that. And we are definitely, the city is committed to developing metrics for the goals. We wanted to first take the community's temperature on the goals to see, are these right? And then from there, we'll develop the metrics. So when we come back to you early next year with the draft plan, you'll see the set of metrics there. And so we'll want you to weigh in on that as well. Mass transit post-COVID, that is a good thing to be thinking about and important. So active transportation when the weather is bad. That's so true. That can so influence our choices. Okay. Well, great. Well, the Mentimeter will be up throughout our presentation tonight. So if you think of something that you would like to add, please do. And let's go to our next slide. Oh, just to give you a sense, so that you don't feel like what's on the website is sort of divorced from what we're presenting here tonight, this is what it'll look like when you go to the website and click on the draft vision and goals. There'll be a survey that pops down. So you'll be able to provide your responses and also answer some open-ended questions. So this is just a screenshot of what it'll look like. Okay, next slide. Okay, so draft recommendation. So at this point, I am going to hand it over to Jess to talk about our proposed bike network.
Great, thanks, Megan. So the goals of the bike network really just flow from the goals of the plan overall, which is creating places that are safe and comfortable for people to ride. that are connected to one another and that access destinations. A safe and comfortable network is no help to anyone if it's isolated and just appears as little chunks of pathway around the island. And it's actually not very helpful either if those chunks do connect to one another, but they don't connect to the places you want to go. If that's, going out to dinner on Park Street, or it's riding with your children to school. So we use those as the goals upon which we built the network. And what we're really aiming for is a low stress network, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. The bikeway types for each street were chosen based on the street characteristics, primarily based upon our current understanding of what the speed and volume are on a given street. And then we also noted that there was an interest in north-south connections in the network, and I saw someone brought that up in the Mentimeter earlier as well. Can you go to the next slide? So the way that we're asking for input on the bike network is similar to the way that we did ask for input on the existing conditions earlier in the project. So we have another easy to use online map. And what you're seeing here is where you'll get to in the map, and you'll be able to turn on and off layers, so right now we're just looking at the existing and immediately planned network that is going to be constructed in the next couple of years. And Glenda, if you go to the next slide, you can see how it starts to fill out. These are the bike boulevards that we are recommending as a facility type. You'll see they're mostly on smaller streets in the city, and I'll talk a little bit more about those. And then on the next slide, you can see the full set of recommendations, which are creating a connected network throughout the entire city to really get people where they need to go. And we hope that you'll go on the website and leave us comments about the recommended facilities, and tell us if there are places that you feel like you wouldn't be able to get to with this recommended network. So next slide, please. The facility types that we're using in the recommendations, this is all really to help you interpret that map and think about what your reactions are. Most of these facility types are present today in Alameda. So a shared use path is shared between people walking, biking, rolling, using any kind of non-motorized transportation. Separated bike lanes do already appear in the city. They might not look exactly like the picture we've got there, where you have a planted buffer separating that. That separation from adjacent traffic might be paint and posts, it might be a curb, and in a lot of cases in Alameda, those are two-way facilities that are just for bicyclists, but some of the recommendations we have would be one way on each side of the street. And then I'll come back to the bike boulevard. Then we've got bike lanes, and buffered bike lanes are also facilities that already appear in the city, and bike routes as well, which are essentially a street that is signed for bicyclists. So we'll take a little bit of time to focus on the bike boulevards, because they are the facility type that's not really present in Alameda yet. So what are bike boulevards? They are lower speed and lower volume streets that are made comfortable for people bicycling. They're actually also really great often for people walking, because part of what makes a bike boulevard is traffic calming. And so speeds are going to be lower for automobiles on the street, which means it's easier for people to cross the street. You feel more comfortable, potentially even walking along the street. I know that the selection of the slow streets that the city has implemented to date are actually based upon streets where we have bike boulevard recommendations in this plan. So you can imagine them a little bit like the slow street, but more permanent, essentially. And what treatments make a bike boulevard a bike boulevard? On the next slide, we can show a couple of those things. And what I really want to point out is that bike boulevards are created from a suite of treatments, and in this project, what we're doing is identifying the places where bike boulevards are the most appropriate facility type. And then down the line, when the city moves toward implementing and designing these facilities, that's when they'll be selecting the from the suite of treatments that you see on this slide and figuring out exactly where each of these applies. But what's really most important are three things related to bike boulevards. Number one is crossings. If you have a street that is comfortable and already kind of low speed and lower volume, it's not very helpful when you get to a big street and there's no signal. It's got multiple lanes that you want to cross. And so what we want to focus on first is crossing treatment. So in the lower right-hand part of the screen is a rapid flashing beacon. That's one type of treatment that might happen at an intersection to improve things. A second part of bike boulevards is traffic calming. So you've got speed humps, speed cushions. Those are appearing in a couple of those photos. There are also mini circles that would be placed at the center of intersections on these bike boulevards. And then I've also talked a little bit about the fact that bike boulevards are not just about slower speeds, they're also about lower traffic volumes. And so on down the line, when these projects move into an implementation and design phase, the city may also consider traffic diversion. And that's what you see in the picture in the upper left. It's an intersection that's actually about 6 blocks from my house here in Portland. And at this point, cars are forced to turn either right or left. They can't continue through, but bicyclists can. And I just want to emphasize that any project with all of these aspects would have a kind of separate community process as it gets implemented and designed with the city. So next slide, just very quickly, what are streets that already are almost a bike boulevard in Alameda? There are no actual bike boulevards as we've talked about so far, but Bayview Drive is getting close. It has traffic calming. It's already a pretty low volume street. It has Sharrow markings that you can see, those little bikes with arrows on the street. Some communities like to move forward with larger bike boulevard markings. You'll see that if you've ever ridden in Berkeley. They have huge stencils on the ground on their bike boulevards. And then a street that's this wide, you might also consider moving forward with one of those mini circles in some of the intersections just to both physically and visually narrow the corridor, which will also contribute to lower speeds. So Bayview is partway there, but then there are these couple other steps that the city would think about taking and implementing a bike boulevard. So what we want to ask you right now is, given this description and all these treatments that would create a bike boulevard, would you feel comfortable riding on one as described? And for a lot of folks, you may have actually ridden on a bike boulevard in Berkeley as well, so you can kind of take that into consideration as you think about your answer to this question. So one thing that we want to make sure that you're also thinking about, because we understand that people feel differently when they're riding with their kids, think about, would you feel comfortable as an adult, or would you also feel comfortable riding with children? So fairly even between those two right now. Not a lot of folks saying that they wouldn't feel too comfortable here or that they're unsure. You know, we would like to consider these what we call an all ages and abilities facility. So this is a place where a child could ride, where someone who has potentially limited capabilities in terms of, or might need to use an adaptive bicycle could ride as well. And then a place where people would also feel comfortable walking or wheeling and taking advantage of those lower speeds and traffic volume. So this is helpful for us to know moving forward, and these really can form a very comfortable and quiet backbone network on Alameda streets. I think I'll pass it back to Megan to start talking about the pedestrian side. Well,
Can you hear me?
Now we can, yes.
Okay, great. I have to unmute the computer and the phone, note to self. Okay, well, thank you, Jess. So great, so now we're gonna take a look at the draft pedestrian recommendations, and I want to honor that these are a bit complicated, and if you feel like it's quite foggy, that you're not the only one. It's a little complicated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my best to describe this. Also know that this is online, and the city is going to be holding a listening session specifically about the pedestrian recommendations on August 10th at noon. So if you are interested in this and want to dive in a little bit deeper, there is that opportunity. And they will also be holding listening sessions on other individual topics as well. I just wanted to point that one out in specific, because this might be something that's different than you've seen before. Okay, so great. So what I'm going to walk us through is that there are about 5 different components that make up the pedestrian infrastructure recommendations. So we've got a handful of maps, and then a matrix, and also some posters. So that's what I'm going to talk us through now. So Belinda, next slide, please. So first, what we developed is a map. And Belinda, I'm going to ask you to go to the next slide and then back to this slide, because I just like to give folks a view of the map. So I'm talking about the characteristics of this map here. This is what we call our street typology map. So Belinda, if you could go back to the previous slide for me. So the city has the recognition that different types of streets have different characteristics. So a neighborhood street like Peach Street, it's going to be less traffic. Traffic's going to go at a slower speed. These are likely going to be, candidates for a bike boulevard. So more folks walking and biking because of the lower speeds and lower traffic. So this is going to have mostly residential, so lots of homes on streets like this. Then sort of the next most intense street is called a neighborhood connector. So Shoreline Drive is an example of this. This is a street that is a bit bigger than your residential street, but that provides connections between residential streets or between neighborhoods. So it's going to have a little bit more traffic than your neighborhood street, but not as big as as the main street or the commercial street. So the next category is Main Street. So an example of this would be Park Street or Webster Street. And there are other pockets throughout the city as well that are categorized as a main street. And then your commercial or industrial streets are going to be the bigger, higher speed, higher volume. So lots of cars driving quickly, and these are going to be the ones that feel quite uncomfortable to cross. That you would probably want to cross at a signalized intersection, or just really double check that no cars are coming. So these are the 4 different kinds of streets that are in Alameda as we are proposing. So next slide, Belinda. So what we did is we took a look at the city, and we looked at every street in the city, and we said, what kind of street are you? And so you'll see over here on the left, this is a map of the entire city. And then on the right, it's sort of a very zoomed in version. So you'll see Webster Street is identified as a main street. Buena Vista is a neighborhood connector. You'll see Taylor Avenue is a neighborhood street. And then Constitution Way is identified as a commercial or industrial street. And the reason it's important to do this is to recognize that the kind of changes you need to make to, say, Taylor Street or Peach Street are different than the kind of changes you need to make to Constitution Way or Willie Stargell Avenue. That they're different. And so we really don't want to leave the city with a one-size-fits-all recommendation. And so we want it to be quite nuanced. So Belinda, next slide, please. So in addition to different streets having different characteristics, there's also the realization that different areas have different characteristics, and that it's important to consider what's on the ground as we make our recommendations. So we also developed what we call an overlay map. And so that just means we are identifying the areas where there are schools, where there are community destinations. So this includes parks, it includes libraries, City Hall, I think, is a community destination. And then we also identified where the transit routes are and where the truck routes are. And so these are streets, these are locations within the city that need additional attention. And that if a school is on a neighborhood street, so say a school is on Peach Street or Taylor Avenue, that in addition to the types of recommendations we would make because it's a neighborhood street, we would also layer on top more recommendations because it's a school. So the interest is really trying to recognize that different areas throughout the city have different characteristics, and that we don't want a one-size-fits-all approach for making changes on the ground for people to walk more comfortably and safely. So then our third piece to this is called our design treatment matrix. I'm realizing that we gave these the most jargony names we possibly could. So you'll have to let us know on the survey, how could we rename these to be less planner-ese, as we say. So what this is this is a chart, and this says, okay, if you are a neighborhood street, what kind of changes can we make to you to make you safer to walk on? So an example could be a curb extension or a raised crossing. It could be building a sidewalk if needed. So what the city is going to be able to do is they're going to be able to look at a street in the city and say, we have money to make changes. Changes are needed on this street. So let's say, I'm going to stick with Peach Street because that was our example before. So say that the city has funding to make changes. So they can come to the map and say, okay, Peach Street is a neighborhood street. And then they can come to this table and say, okay, according to this table, these are the types of improvements that are most appropriate for a neighborhood street. And by the way, there's also a school nearby. These are the types of improvements that are appropriate for that area. Okay, next slide, Belinda. So recognizing that that this can also be very jargony, we created this poster, and this is also available online. And these talk about all the different types of treatments that the city can consider in their toolbox of pedestrian infrastructure recommendations. So because there's so many, Belinda had to create us 2 posters. So if you could go to the next slide, you'll see her handiwork here again. So this is a second set of pedestrian infrastructure changes that we can consider for making streets safer. And if you look at the pictures, you'll probably either recognize some of these within Alameda already, within Berkeley, or within San Francisco. So hopefully some of these are familiar. We're also happy to talk more about this during the Q&A, but I'm going to keep going so that we have time for a nice robust Q&A. Next slide, please. So before we hop into our Mentimeter question, I do want to note that the city is developing a set of discrete capital projects. So that includes projects that maybe don't fit so squarely in the bucket of pedestrian recommendations or bike network. And this list is coming soon. So this will include maintenance, for example, would be something like that would fall into this bucket. Okay, so if y'all would like to hop on over to Mentimeter, we're interested to know, are there certain design treatments, and what we mean, are there certain changes that you could make to a street that would make it feel more comfortable when walking or biking? Or excuse me, when walking in specific. Speed bumps, great. Yeah, and this could be something that's in our list that we provided. It could also be something that you've seen in another community or in travels throughout the U.S. So smooth, wide sidewalks. When we did our focus group meetings, we did meetings with older adults, and this was especially important. So they said even with a slight lip, it can be a big a serious tripping hazard. And so appreciate that comment. Repaired sidewalks, we're seeing it again. Good lighting at intersections. Periodic benches. That's a great point, because there's also, as a part of that table, is streetscape improvements, and so benches would definitely fall under that. Anything that slows down traffic, removes parking, reduces noise and pollution, and makes it entertaining. That's a great comment. That's great. Flashing street beacons, greater separation from vehicle traffic, smooth, wide sidewalk, 6 to 10 feet. This is great. Ensure that bicyclists do not ride on sidewalks. So there can be a conflict between users. So our goal is that with the bicycle improvements implemented in tandem with the pedestrian improvements, that people will feel like they have more safe places to be when traveling. No beg to cross pedestrian signals. Yeah, so those are the push buttons. Tree trimming, great. This is an awesome list. Great. Okay. Well, thank you all. And again, please keep adding in comments. We're going to download all the responses, so we'll be able to review these again. Okay. Thank you, Belinda. If we want to move on to our next slide. So now I'm going to pass it over to Rochelle.
Great. Can you guys hear me? Yeah, cool. All right. So you've heard now about 3 distinct sets of recommendations that we're asking for your input on: the vision and goals, the bikeway network, pedestrian infrastructure, and now we're moving into another set of recommendations that we've developed. And these are some draft concept designs. And what we looked at was we dove into looking at 3 streets in a lot more detail than kind of the high level you've been seeing. And I want to just talk about why we selected these streets and why we did this. So we heard from the community, both during our own engagement process, and we've heard in previous engagement processes, that the community would like better walking and biking access and safety on these 3 streets: Park Street, Webster Street, and Lincoln Avenue. All of these streets are 4-lane roads. All of them have a high number of bike and or ped collisions on them. They're some of the highest in our city. And so there's real safety issues here. And then 2 of them obviously are commercial corridors that have a lot of, so there are other competing needs. There are also transit corridors with our major trunk lines on them. So, so we thought we would look in a little bit more detail about what kind of changes we could make to these streets. And the goal of this is really to start a conversation about this, to start looking at, well, how could we make these streets safer for people walking and biking? How could we make it easier and more comfortable for people to walk and bike both to and along these streets? And so all of these options are really complete streets options. They're looking at improving conditions for both people walking and biking. And we've presented 2 or 3 what we feel like are strong options, kind of high-level options, concept plans, again, for each corridor. And obviously, there's a lot of other iterations that could be possible out there. And what we're trying to do with this active transportation plan is look at taking some of those, taking some of these designs, putting them out there to get input on them, and that will help us to provide some guidance for goals and policies for how we should adjust changes to these streets. And maybe we will recommend one of these concepts with some tweaks, but it's also possible we would recommend sort of more high-level goals and policies at the end, and not a specific concept. So I don't want you to feel like you choose A or B and then we're blasting forward with B. You know, this is really meant, like I said, to start a conversation. Also, finally, I just want to mention that we just looked at short blocks or typical segments of these streets to try to kind of test out different ideas. We did not try to plan for the whole street. And I'm just going to give you a really quick overview of these. You can find all the information online and you can give us input on them. We're also going to have one of our listening sessions on August 6th is just going to be on these concept designs. So feel free to come to that. Next slide, please. So here's our first option of two options for Park Street, and this is just one of the blocks that we picked. This is actually quite similar to what's on Park Street today. After the restriping, we've reduced it from 4 lanes to 2 lanes in this concept. The only difference between what's on the street now and this is how we're using that extra space that we freed up. So right now, today, that's starting to be used by businesses for parklets. And this concept shows, well, what if we had that space, we could use it for walking and biking. So one of the things you'll see here is you'll see curb and sidewalk extensions at the corners and along the street, like on the west side of the street. So at the top of the page, you can see some additional gray extending the sidewalk, so making more room on the sidewalks. And then when we look at Park, we also are looking at Oak Street, and we're looking at these two as a corridor. And in our bikeway planning, we really feel like it is critical in our bikeway network to have one of these two streets have a low stress facility. Jess was talking about the different types of low stress facilities. And so we decided to look at how could we do that on Park Street, because it's the more challenging of the two of between Oak and Park. So we're showing Park Street here, and here is this separated bike lanes. So these are protected bike lanes. There'd be some sort of vertical barrier between bicyclists and the travel network. And then on the next slide, please, this next option is showing, this is the second option. This is using that extra space that we get by reducing the street from 4 lanes to 2 lanes for buffered bike lanes. And also we have a painted bulb out as well. This visual is looking kind of doubled for me. Is it looking that way for other people? Maybe Belinda and Megan, you could kind of try to figure that out while I keep going. So this option, the buffered bike lane, is not a low stress option. And so if we were to do something like this on Park Street, which would be great, it would make it better than it was before for biking, because it would have buffered bike lanes. We would have the low stress facility on Oak Street, and Oak Street would need to be a bike boulevard most likely, because it's a narrower road. So let's see, can we move to the next slide, please? All right, well, even though it's double for some reason, I think we're still basically seeing what we want to see.
Yeah, Rochelle, this is Megan. Once we're done with the presentation, we can show a screenshot of the website where it's not doubled. So Belinda, you want to just move on to the next slide and we can come back to that?
Oh no, let's stay here at this one.
You want to stay here? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. You mean once we're done with the whole presentation, right, Megan? Yeah.
I did, but
okay, yeah. So I'll just finish up on the concepts here then. So for Webster Street, you can see here, this is the first of 2 options for Webster Street. Next month, as you might know, several blocks of Webster Street are also going to be restriped like we did on Park Street to make more room for our businesses to survive by moving the dining and the retail outside into the parklet space. So this option that you see right now on the screen is similar to what will be done on Webster Street. Again, 4 lanes to 2 lanes. The only difference in this option is how we're using that extra space. So it will be used for parklets during our COVID times. And then this concept is showing it more using that for walking and biking. So we have some curb extensions here, which you can see a little bit of. We retained parking on both sides of the street, and we removed one of the mid-block bulb outs on the west side to keep even more parking available there. So Webster Street is really critical for our bikeway network as well, and network connectivity. And we need low stress facilities here in the long term. We know that, but it's very challenging. There are no parallel corridors like there are in Park Street. So this is a low stress option for Webster Street with separated bike lanes. Next slide, please. And the next one is our second option for Webster Street. And this is using that extra space again from reducing the travel lanes. This is using that extra space for putting in buffered bike lanes. And again, this is not a low stress facility, but it would improve bike access and safety to a certain degree. Next slide, please. So this is now for Lincoln Street. And here's our first of three options on Lincoln. And on Lincoln, as everyone knows, the width of the street varies considerably from east to west. So we've picked out two locations along that spectrum of width to show you here. Here is Lincoln between 9th and Mozart. And what we've done is have 4 travel lanes that have now been reduced to 3 with that center turn lane. It allows us to put in some quite large curb extensions to make the crossings easier, a median refuge island for safety there, more painted crosswalks, and then we also have the buffered bike lanes there. Next slide, please. And so this is sort of another iteration on option A with the buffered bike lanes, but this is a narrower section between Chestnut and Willow, just as an example. We've got the buffered bike lanes. We've got, again, in some places, some sidewalk extensions and some corner bulb out extensions. And, you know, we picked this block because it has gotten a lot of attention. It is where Love School is, but we haven't refined this design, you know, as we might when we move further for the school being there. We've made some modifications, but obviously we would think a lot more about that as we developed any final plan for this block. We can also make some of those other modifications we can make, not necessarily for the school, but in general for this kind of section is, you'll see it in the red circle here. This is where you can find the option B and C, and we only did the cross sections for these two. And so it's kind of small, but in that top one in option B, you can see a 4 to 3 lane conversion instead of a 4 to 2 lane conversion with the center turn lane. And that has just your standard bike lanes, but they are very close to parked cars in a very narrow parking lane. And then option C below that, again, only in cross sections, shows putting a separated bike lane next to on the school side and removing the parking on that side. And that's something we can do here because we have few driveways. It's not so feasible for other parts of Lincoln because of the number of driveways really breaks up that buffered bike lane. And we're happy to talk about that more later in the Q&A if you'd like. But we can do that in really select sections like we might do here in front of a school. So please give us comments via our website on these, and we'll take questions at the end again. And Megan, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Rochelle. Great. Okay. Thank y'all for hanging with us. We just have a handful of slides left. So we recognize that in addition to infrastructure projects, we also need to be quite thoughtful about developing policies and programs that support walking and biking. And this is something that we heard too as a takeaway from our first round of engagement. So we've developed draft programs and policies based on the plan goals, and we're seeking input on these. So here's a snapshot of some of the programs and policies that we've developed. The ones that we have highlighted here are the safety, an example of the safety programs and policies. And these will be very tied to our Vision Zero action plan as well, which also is taking a very close look on the safety recommendations. So we wanted your input on these as well as all of the full package of programs and policies. Next slide. So the way these are organized is you'll have the goals that we talked through before, and then you'll have a specific program objective and action. So it'll kind of go from big to smaller, so bigger to more specific as you look through the programs. That's kind of how they're structured. And the next slide. This is a screenshot of what it looks like on the website, so when you could go visit. So we ask that you share your feedback and share the specific number, because we've numbered them so that we can have an easier time of it post-processing all of the comments after the public comment period has closed. Okay, so next slide, please. Your priorities. Okay, so now we've got all of this material developed, and now we're going to get your feedback on it. And so once we incorporate all your feedback, this is a lot for the city to work on at once. And so with the recognition that there's limited time and budget and staff resources, we really want to prioritize what are the most important pieces that we should be focusing on. So this is what we really want your input on this. So we want to know which kind of categories or items are of high priority and should be implemented in the short term. And we really invite you to give your input on this. And this will be available, of course, on the project website. So next slide, Belinda. Okay, so that's it for us. So just as a reminder, the public comment period will be open until August 16th. The city is going to be holding many more listening sessions to get input and to answer questions. Recognizing that some folks may want to dive in deeper to specific topics, some of the listening sessions will be topical. So you'll see that here. And yeah, we just are excited to hear what you think. So at this point, I believe I'm going to turn it back over to Rochelle so that we can start answering or responding to some of y'all's questions.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So we have about 20 minutes left. So we're gonna kind of look at some of the questions that have come in. And again, if you have any questions, if you're on Zoom with us, please send those to Brian McGuire, and he's adding them to a spreadsheet we have. And then if you're on Facebook Live, you can be putting those in the chat, and we'll be on Facebook Live or the comments, and we'll be answering them there. So I'm just going to look through some of these questions quickly and see. One question that this is going well. What happens to tonight's great comments and input? That I would say tonight this is one of the many formats that we're taking input, in which we're taking input, including that Mentimeter surveys that you did. We're definitely going to grab all of that, all the questions and input that is coming in, and we're going to then look at it all in relation to the recommendations and modify them in the ways that seem kind of appropriate given all the comments we're getting. And then you'll see the revised recommendations when we release the draft plan. And that will be early next year. Let's see. One quick question just to answer: where can we find more detailed high resolution maps from the what have we seen and learned slide? We can definitely post those online. Those are good questions. So we don't think have all of those posted there, but we can post them there. We have a section on our website that's called documents, and we can add those there. So please take a look there. We'll do that in the next couple days. Let's see. Jess, you've answered this, but how about this question? Will there be a metric that tells us what is likely to be built versus infrastructure that will take years? Is there low-hanging fruit for north-south boulevards? Do you want to answer that, Jess?
Sure. So there's not really a metric, but as Megan said, the next step in our process is prioritization. And the way that we often approach that for a project like this is taking the feedback that we've heard from you and trying to figure out the data about the various projects that help express the values that you're saying are most important to you in terms of these projects. So that process will go through looking at the values that you've expressed, trying to figure out how to translate the goals of this project into data. So for instance, should we focus most on corridors that have the highest frequency of crashes? That might be a way that we end up prioritizing infrastructure. And then to the question about low-hanging fruit for north-south boulevards, a little bit of what I was talking about in terms of intersection improvements on bike boulevards can often be the best place to start for their implementation, because we're looking at streets that already are close to being good. You know, they are lower volume already. In a lot of cases, they are lower speed, even though they probably would benefit from some traffic calming. But getting those intersections fixed so that you are not confronting a 4-lane or a 3-lane crossing with no help, essentially without a traffic signal, is a first place to focus. So yeah, that probably would be a potential low-hanging fruit in terms of implementation for bike boulevards. And those, even though, as I said, there's a design process that goes along with implementing them, many of the changes are a little bit less impactful. You know, we're not talking about removing parking, for instance, on streets like that to fit in a bike lane or a buffered bike lane or separated bike lane. We're not talking about changing the travel lanes. Those are probably things that need a lot more community discussion, as opposed to some of the changes on a bike boulevard.
Great, thank you, Jess. Kind of related to that, about kind of where we go from here. We have a question of all the, and I'll try to answer this, of all the quote blue sky designs we are looking at, what percentage do you actually feel will be built in the next 5 years? That's a great question. You know, especially with, I know we've heard that, especially with the economic, some economic downturn and having to tighten our belts at the city, and just generally less funding for transportation. So I don't know, we haven't kind of, I think that's something we'll be looking at the next phase, like what can we realistically recommend to get implemented. We're looking at a 10-year horizon right now, so through 2030, with probably there would be an update kind of midway through that of our active transportation plan. And I think that you know, we're going to be looking at what things, well, I guess two things. We'll be wanting to, I really have encouraging us not to kind of dampen our vision because of the current situation we're in. Like, we know things will eventually change and the economy will at some point again improve. And so this is a time for us to kind of think about, and especially this phase, what we really would like to see in our city and where do we want to go. And then with prioritization, with an implementation plan, we can kind of like phase that and scale it down to like, well, how much funding do we actually have? What can we expect from grants? So, and obviously a huge thing right now, and you've seen this on Park Street, is quick build projects. And how can we make things, get them out there faster rather than spending 5 years planning them, doing everything in concrete? Like, let's test out these ideas. Let's use some paint and bollards, and we can always modify it. And that's a first phase. And then we can always make it more permanent later, if it's needed, and if it's, you know, if people are liking it. So let's see, here's a question maybe for Jess. Can you answer this one? Are there thoughts of speed cameras to slow traffic?
Yeah, great question. So unfortunately for everyone in California, they are not currently legal in the state. So they are a great option that have been very effective in other cities, and it's something that we're talking about as part of the Vision Zero action plan. And there actually, over the last year or so, was a state level group that Caltrans brought together to look into things that could change at a policy level statewide to improve traffic safety. And that group did recommend further investigation of using speed cameras in the state. So, you know, the things that the city can do at this point is help support that move. And eventually, once they are legal within the state, consider how they're best used for the city.
Great, okay. Let's see, here's kind of just jumping around here. Here's one. I heard there was a plan for Otis Drive. It was not mentioned tonight. Is that one on the back burner? So you might have, if you've looked at the bikeway map, you've seen that there's a planned bike facility on Otis between Westline and Willow. And that is, we have, I believe, put that project out to bid, and that project will be implemented later this year. So that is going to be also a road diet with buffered bike lanes and a lot of pedestrian improvements. So that is coming. And then you'll see recommendations we have for addressing Otis towards the east end of the island, and thinking about things we could do there. And Caltrans is also has plans to repave that section, their section of Otis further to the east that connects to the Bay Farm Bridge. And they're looking at things that they could do there. We're working closely with them on that. So, so that was one question. Let's see. Let's see. Some questions about the different concept plans. So option A for Webster is the only low stress option, correct. That is, of those two, that's the only low stress option that we have shown. And a low stress option, again, low stress are streets that are either a bicycle path, like what you find on the Cross Alameda Trail in certain sections, separated bike lanes, or a bike boulevard. And so obviously of those three, a separated bike lane is the only thing that could be low stress on Webster. That said, there's a lot of different ways to design separated bike lanes. And so what we've shown in that is one way to do that, but it does require space and it does require the separation. Is there anything you want to add on that, Jess?
Not really. I mean, separated bike lanes, the right thing there because of the speeds and the volumes. You know, there are, as Rochelle said, there are other ways that you could configure it. But generally, just one thing to say is that a one-way facility on each side of the street is definitely more appropriate. And in this case, because you have high enough traffic volumes, that figuring out how to deal with those conflicts between people who are riding essentially the opposite direction of traffic on one side of the street can be really difficult to deal with safely at intersections. So that's why we've got it one way on each side of the street in this concept.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Great. There's a question here about and either Megan or Jess, maybe you could answer. There's a question here about, will police enforcement be stepped up for speeding automobiles as it was when I moved here 15 years ago? Pace cars and such a recurring costs, but tickets cause people to slow down. Who would like to answer that?
I think Megan is answering and muted.
I am answering and muted. Thank you. So that's a great question. And Rochelle, please prompt me if I don't answer the full question. Traffic enforcement is obviously something that a lot of cities are taking a very close look at right now. At Toole Design, what we really recommend is that streets are designed so that they promote the behavior we'd like to see, versus having humans tell other humans what to do. And we also know the negative ramifications of that. This is something that we are considering as a part of the Vision Zero action plan, and that the Vision Zero task force is really thinking very closely about, and the city is as well. And you've probably seen news stories of how other cities throughout the Bay Area are thinking about this. We did include a pace car recommendation in the programs. So we're interested to see what you think. A lot of these recommendations, we did our best at the time, but I think a lot, there's a recognition that things have greatly changed, and we want these to be appropriate for the Alameda community, and y'all know what's best in that regard. So we're really looking for your input here. Rochelle, did I answer the question as prompted?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
I think that, you know, as probably everyone here knows, there's a big effort in the city to look at our police department and police reform, and that's right now where traffic enforcement is done. So that is going to be part of that discussion. And so we're going to be looking a lot to that for guidance on sort of how we use enforcement in the city. And we're definitely open through the programs section for taking your input on that. And we'll also be looking at that through our Vision Zero planning work. So we've got a lot of great questions here. Let's see. Are there recommendations in the draft about daylighting? Parked cars too close to corners are common. Yeah, great question. We definitely, that is one of the recommendations for pedestrian improvements. It's also something that we already have a policy on from our council for increasing the amount of daylighting. And so it's something that we are doing. And by the end of the year, actually, we're going to be doing a lot more of that around the city, I think mainly on our high injury corridors, because that is a contributor to collisions. Let's see. Sorry about this, just lots of scanning here. There was some questions about kind of the crossings of the bridge. Please share the information on the bike bridge and notify the public when it's up. So we have been doing a lot of early detailed feasibility studies for the West End bicycle pedestrian crossing. You'll see in the bike and the pedestrian recommendations that we have that as a one of our recommendations is a bridge on the West End for bicyclists and pedestrians, somewhere around where the tubes are. We're going to be posting soon on our website some information about the studies that have been done and some of the planning that's going into that. But that is strongly supported by our council, and that's something that we are moving forward with. So that we'll put more information there. There's also a question about, is there any plan to work with Oakland to get them to improve pavement condition and bike lane options on their side of the Park Street Bridge? Stretches of Kennedy Street are really terrible, dangerous for bike tires. And yeah, we're in coordination with Oakland, and they're definitely very aware of that need. We push that. We're happy, we're all happy to work together. And I really think it comes down to a situation of funding and where their priorities are within Oakland. And unfortunately, we can't set those. Jess, maybe this has come up a few times, just kind of questions about traffic impacts and traffic impact studies with these proposals and implementing them, increase traffic on side streets or parallel streets, and is that being studied with this plan, and how do we address that? Do you want to give a shot at that and I can add in?
Sure. And I actually might look to Belinda for some backup on this, because she's the one who was really closest to developing a lot of the recommendations to start with. We have a pretty limited number of cases within the bike network where we're recommending a change that would have an impact on the number of lanes on a street. We showed the concepts for Lincoln, Park, and Webster, and those are definitely 3 of them. Although, as Rochelle mentioned, for Park, there's a little bit of consideration there between Park and Oak, kind of which is going to end up being the primary bike route there. But Belinda, can you say a little bit about sort of where there might be other impacts, or sort of how how much of an impact does it seem like there is within the network on changing the number of lanes on streets?
Yeah, in terms of changing the number of travel lanes, there were very few projects. I actually don't have the list in front of me, but I would say, yeah, Otis, as was mentioned, that's kind of already in the works. And then I think Lincoln and Toole was maybe the only other one that I can think of offhand. There were actually very few throughout the city.
Yeah, and we have some information on traffic counts from the city, and we use pretty general like engineering rules of thumb to decide where we think that that could be appropriate. But this is a plan, and a plan leads to implementation. And none of these recommendations are going to be put on the street tomorrow. There's additional work to be done, and that's just kind of the way that planning and design of transportation infrastructure works. Sometimes you get these great opportunities that we see right now where the city is, taking the reins and just running forward with Park Street. And it's an opportunity for experimentation and to see how it goes. Obviously, we're in a very different moment right now in terms of traffic. Those opportunities don't come along every day. So, kudos to the city for taking that opportunity and just seeing what happens. Some of those natural experiments can really lead to pretty interesting answers, even when the traffic volumes start to come back. So, everything that's on the map is what we would hope can move forward, but this is not kind of the end of the line in terms of how much is going to be studied.
Great.
Thanks, Jess. This is Megan. Rochelle, I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Okay. Let's see. Yeah, there's good questions here. So I'm going to squeeze in two quick ones that are just quick to answer, and I think kind of hopeful, ending on a hopeful note here. One is about, are the business district merchants supportive of the Park, Lincoln, and Webster changes? For the changes that are on Park Street or coming to Webster Street, those changes are happening in direct response to those business districts and what they've requested in order to help their businesses thrive. We're working really closely with them on getting input also on our concepts for the longer term. So we're still going to see if they're supportive of what concepts that are in our plan. But for what's out there, that project was driven by what the business districts like. We've worked less on Lincoln Street because that's not a business improvement area, but happy to take input from those folks. And then lastly, I can't find it right now, but there was a question in here about, are we really on track? Oh, are the projects planned for 2023 fully financed and sure to be done at that time? And I would say the great answer is pretty much yes. That those projects like Central and Encinal and Otis and Clement are moving forward and pretty much on track for the 2020 through 2023 timeframe. So that's the great news, is we've already got a lot of projects in the pipeline. So I will. Did you want to say anything, Megan, or should I wrap us up?
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add is we know that we did not get to everyone's questions. And so what we're going to do is take a look at the questions we didn't get to and provide responses. So that might not happen tonight, but we will provide written responses and post them on the website. So your question is not lost. Rochelle, I hand it back to you.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so just remember, like it says on here, these are all the different ways to give comment. Please go to our webpage and look at all the documents in detail and fill out our little short surveys there. Go to the bike map and put your comments on it. You can see other people's comments too that they've already made there. And then please attend one of these additional listening sessions where we'll have more time for more questions and more input. And finally, if you'd like to be added to our mailing list to stay notified about the opportunities to give comment throughout this process, please go to our website and under Get Involved, there's a place with our email address, and you can send us an email and we'll add you to our mailing list. Our email is activealameda@alamedaca.gov if you want to shoot us an email there. And finally, just thanks everyone for participating. Thank you so much for taking time out tonight, and stay engaged and stay healthy and well. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.